taking time out of a very, very busy time in your semester to share this space with me for a little bit. Also want to thank all in the art department. I'm so very grateful for the opportunity to be an artist in residence here at Western Carolina. I also want to thank the many students, both graduate and undergraduate, that welcomed me into their studios and their classrooms over the last 2 semesters. The term, indeed, the idea of artist in residence is something I'd like to explore with you all today, along with the idea of what constitutes one's studio practice, and indeed, what I've experienced over the last 10 years by exploring my own model of both an artist residency and a studio practice, sometimes without an actual studio. I like to think of it as an artist as resource as much as one in residence. There are many models of what an artist in residence can look like. The very term of artist in residence implies that the artist actually lives in residence, or at the very least has a studio space in residence. But there are many other models too. And my experience this year has shown me one that has nurtured not only my actual work, but has also nurtured my idea of community and space, and how those things aren't necessarily fixed in one place. An example of this, just to offer one, would be that sometimes an artist in residency, especially for someone who is not, as I mentioned, living in the space as in residence, I'm traveling an hour from Asheville to here to get here, and then an hour from here to Asheville back. That hour in the car can actually be a very fertile and vital part of my residency. Why? Because I can listen to podcasts. I can catch up on important phone calls that I haven't had time to do while I'm trying to make things happen in Asheville. And more importantly, I'm actually driving through the landscape that has been very formative to me personally and my family. Both sides of my family are from Canton and Clyde respectively. So for me to drive from Asheville to Cullowhee, to Western, is also an opportunity for me to drive through the landscape of my family, where I came from. And it also gives me an opportunity to stop and visit. And my family graveyard is in Clyde, and on many occasions, on my way back from Western, I've stopped in Clyde, gone to the family graveyard, visited my father, my grandparents, my older brother, folks that are no longer here with me, but yet I have the opportunity to take that time and that space to do so. And that's part of what this residency, this idea of a resource has been for me these last 2 semesters. It's given me an opportunity to do many different things, but even in the hour that I'm driving back and forth, it's a vital part of how I can nurture my creative life. Another way is just looking at the amazing scenes. For example, that little shortcut between 74 and Silva, you take a little dogleg shortcut and you get to see the wonderful skeleton family dressed appropriately differently around the seasons. You see the state patrol car that's parked on purpose probably on the side of the road to kind of make you think you should slow down, but actually they probably just lived there and haven't woken up yet.
That's a Waynesville cop.
Yes, there's many things that I say that kind of nurture that experience, and they're all vital. May seem small, may seem not that important, but they actually add up and become kind of a living part of what I would consider my time here as a resident, and how grateful I am to have had those 2 hours to be able to kind of meditate, put my mind in a place that hopefully can be helpful when I'm on campus, and also be able to be creative with the ideas that I have going on. There's a couple things I want to share today while we're here. And first, I'd like to share some of the projects that this Western Carolina University Artist in Residence has given me space to explore and engage in. And then I'd like to share my experience of allowing curiosity to guide me, oblivious to what is sometimes perceived as negativity in my practice, and how the very personal act of making one's art can be enriched and expanded by opening one's practice to community voices and the arena of dialogue and shared exchanges in one's personal, i.e. private, studio space. I started my residency with with sharing a commission that I was given at the North Carolina State Museum, and I had just installed it. I came down here in the fall. I had installed it in the summer, came down here in the fall, and I was kind of in this weird place of like, this big project happened, but I didn't know what was going to be next. I didn't know if that project was even successful. I was still in that really weird place. But it's kind of how I started, and as I spent the semester here and had opportunities to think through this project, and I saw slowly how this project was starting to open up opportunities further, the residency here gave me that time and space to think about that and then do some acting on it. And these are just some examples of what that looks like. And also, we were fortunate with the grad program with Jennifer and some of the grad students to go down to Raleigh and visit the commission with the poet who did the text that you saw on the previous slide and the curator who helped commission a particular project. It was a really nice cumulative moment for me here at Western when we did this in the spring, but it also kind of helped me go back to how I started here and think about that I had just come off what in my mind was an important moment in my kind of studio life and my life as an artist here in North Carolina, about having this opportunity at the North Carolina Museum and how that was kind of a springboard for what might happen for the next 2 semesters. And indeed, it did lead to opportunities. It led to this opportunity that the North Carolina Museum offered in Winston-Salem. They just acquired Sika, y'all may know this, but they also are now in the midst of building a new contemporary art space in downtown Winston-Salem, and they're starting to program that, and I was asked to program that in the spring of 2027. This residency actually gave me the opportunity to work out ideas and think about ways that I might do so. And this is a mock-up, sketch-up mock-up of the space in which that I'll be doing work in, and it's got examples of the work that I've decided that I'd like to try to show. And it comes from that series Garlands, which you saw at the museum earlier. And I'm expanding on that and doing a full exhibition of that work. My time here partly was spent thinking about this work, thinking about selecting pieces from this work. If you've been by my office upstairs, you'll notice that there's a work, what I would call an image board with work prints all around, where I was putting them up and starting to think about which ones I wanted to actually show, which ones would actually be appropriate, and how I could think about that body of work as a show, as an opportunity to speak to that work in one single space in multi-sizes and what have you. And this residency gave me that space to do so, and I'm grateful for it. I also had the opportunity to work on a project that was out of state. I was contacted during the fall by a good friend of mine, Vesna, who is here on the right, and asked if I wanted to come to Sewanee, Tennessee to work on or investigate this project that they were doing called Ghost Pools, which was about a very interesting moment in American history where after the Civil Rights Movement, after segregation was ended in the Supreme Court, the southern states kind of found a way around that, and that was separate but equal situations. So what would happen is, instead of integrating the public pools in these different southern cities, they would create separate public pools that had to be equal, same size, as the white pools. And those pools were designated for use by African Americans. They have a long history, and I'm not going to get into that, but I got dropped into this to do some workshops with the community where this pool was located. Of course, now it's abandoned, and you can see the diving board there, and you can kind of see a sense of it there. And I came there and did a workshop with these folks and took some photographs, and it was an incredible experience for me personally, but even more so with my studio work, because I was working in a way that I'd never worked before. Thinking about my practice in a very, very socially relevant way, whereas most of the time my practice is very much insular, and then afterwards I find ways to connect it to the community. This was an opportunity to start with the community and me find a way into that with my work. And it was a very powerful 3 days while I was there, meeting with the community, doing workshops with the community, listening to the stories, and understanding the power of images, and how the community wanted to find a way to memorialize this space and find a way to do a community artwork that would give meaning and provide a gathering area around this space. And it was, it's a project that's ongoing, but again, it's a project that I was able to take the time to find the space for because of an artist residency, of having the capability of knowing that I had this as a grounding. This is some of the scanner work I did on the grounds. I found it really fascinating for me to go at something that I had no connection to initially, but afterwards became deeply connected to the detritus and the things that were just left in this space throughout that history. I've also got the opportunity to be in 2 group shows, and both of these group shows, the fabrication, the choices of the work, the conversations, the writing around it, happened during my residency. One is Forest for the Trees exhibition that's going to be in Chautauqua this summer, and the second is Field Studies exhibition that's going to be up in Blowing Rock at the Brom, again, this summer. Again, I want to share the opportunities that this residency gave me. I want to show my great gratitude to that and thank everyone here at Western for giving me that chance. And I hope that the fruits of it that you'll see coming up will be satisfying. The other thing that happened was I was commissioned to put work in a private residence. This is my favorite picture of the whole thing. I didn't even want to show my work that was in it, but I love this opportunity to go into someone's home and then decide how they would engage with the work, how they might see the work. And there was a moment where I realized that the pieces were going to be on these landings, which at first I was kind of like, wow, you're not going to really get to experience the work. You're going to be walking through the work. But actually, what happens is when you see the work, you see kind of bits and pieces of the work at the same time. And to me, that was just like, one of those personal, like, that's exciting, that's cool, that's interesting, that's something I haven't thought about before when I'm thinking about the work. I'm always thinking about whole pieces and the way they relate. Now I can actually think about half the piece or a third of the piece relating. Again, these are all things that were possible because of the residency. And lastly, I got the opportunity to visit 8 classes and work with students from both grad and undergrad here at Western. And that was, to be very frank about it, that was the most, it brought the most joy to me because it kind of reconnected me to something that I had missed since I resigned from my tenure post now going on 13 years ago. And to be very frank about it, this is a great segue. This experience of being invited into the classroom, working with students in a variety of different mediums, drawing, 3D, photo, and the like, just kind of helped me reconnect back to the reasons in which I started Revolve to begin with. And I'd like to move towards that so I can talk a little bit about that experience. So just a quick recap. I was tenured at St. Mary's College of Maryland for 12 years. I resigned for a variety of reasons, which we don't need to get into right now. But I can say that one of them was I didn't want to go to meetings or be the department chair. I wanted to teach and work in my studio. Once you got tenure, there was no choice in some of that. So I decided to make a big life change, and I moved from Maryland back to Asheville, which is where I grew up in Mills River until I went to App State in 1983. And then I transferred up to the Corcoran in Washington, D.C. 1987 to art school. That set a path of 25 years away from Asheville. But as I mentioned, after getting tenure at St. Mary's in 2010, the 3 years that followed that, I decided to resign and move back to Asheville and focus primarily on my studio work and be closer to my mother, who still lives in Mills River. I got back here in 2013, and let me say, that was a harsh reality. I went from tenured professor, golden handcuffs as they say, to no job in Asheville at 2013. And I don't think I thought that far. And that's kind of how things go. I was like, I'm excited, I'm gonna have change, I'm gonna focus on my work, blah, 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 blah. But when I moved to Asheville, I realized, A, I lost my entire community that I had built over 25 years up in the DC region. My galleries were up in the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast. And I moved to Asheville, and I knew my mom and one other person, and that person moved away in the fall that I moved here. So all of a sudden I was like, ooh, I did not think this through very well. Because not only did I not have community, I didn't have a job. So I had to think about how to do that. And I'm not going to go into all the particulars, but let me simply say that after about 2 years, it became clear to me that, and this is 2 years of not making work, which is the reason I came here, and 2 years of kind of wondering what's next. It became clear to me that what's next could be right in front of me, and I just had to acknowledge that, which was spend some time in Asheville, spend some time trying to be part of this community and learn what the community, who the community is, what the community might need, and then how can I engage in that? How can I become a part of that? And those of you that have been in Asheville for a while know that Asheville, even in 2013, was a very different place than it is now in 2026. There were very different opportunities to make space as a creative person, as an artist, in Asheville than there is now, all because of cost at this point. So after 2 years of going to events, going to galleries, going to artist pop-ups here and there, I realized that what was lacking was a place, a space that artists could gather in without worrying about commerce, without worrying about spending money. This coincided with two things. One, my grandmother passed, my paternal grandmother passed, was my last living grandparent, and she graciously left me $10,000, which I had no idea about. And I was like, oh, wow, okay, now what am I going to do with this $10,000? I could take a vacation, that might be nice. Or I could buy a new car, that'd probably be a good idea. Or maybe I could invest it in whatever the next is. And everyone told me not to do that. Because it's going to just disappear, you know. And the next is an unknown, what's going to happen. But, you know, I already jumped in the unknown when I decided to quit my job and move here. So I'm like, let's go with this, let's try it. If $10,000 can get me established in a space, and let's see what happens. And that's what happened. Currently, in 2026, I'm showing you kind of some things that have happened in the space 10 years later, and how the space is being activated, what kind of things we do in the space, how the space is still gratefully and thankfully alive. We do small events still that are filled with music in the space where artists show. We do large-scale installations, site-specific installations with poetry, performance, music, and art, with audiences of 100, 110 per night. And as you can see from this slide, which I'll get back to later, in the years between 2015, when I established it, and 2024, we did a lot. And it was shocking for me to kind of go through this when I was putting this together and realize, because I didn't really have time to think about this too often when I was doing this, because that's kind of a good reason why, that we got a lot done. We did a lot. And what was beautiful about it, that it didn't feel like it at the time. I was just doing it. And I'll get back to that in a second. Revolve started at the Cocktail Studios. Not why, because that was a building that seemed central. As y'all know, the Cocktail building was completely destroyed in Helene, but it's now back online again. It's wonderful. But I was there in 2015. I took a bottom space as an idea of an art space, as something to do, something to kind of activate. And I was in space here, and then eventually I was in the space up there. So it was 3 windows were the space that, the 2 spaces that I thought about taking. I got a little carried away by 2 spaces. That was a little more than maybe I should have been off. So very quickly I pivoted from 2 spaces into 1 space. This is how the bottom space looked when I first opened it. And this was the first gathering of community people around, and this was in the summer of 2015, around this idea of keeping a dream journal. And a good friend of mine, who you've seen just previously, the poet that I worked with at North Carolina Museum of Art, Revolve, who was here, decided he would come in the summer when he was taking a break from his teaching, and he'd love to run a workshop on keeping a dream journal as a creative person. And to my surprise, me not knowing very many people, him not knowing anyone, we had a pretty good group show up to do this 3-day workshop. And this was down on the bottom floor. By the end of this workshop, it was pretty clear that I couldn't afford both spaces because I was kind of going back and forth. So I moved everything upstairs in the fall. And this is where it looked like when I first started to move in. This is when I started kind of putting things to make it feel homey. And keep in mind, at this point, this was both going to be my studio and it was going to be a public space, community space that I had called and decided to call Revolve, that I started with some seed money from my grandmother and also some seed money from Bernard and his partner Art, because he loved coming so much in the summer and during the programs, and he saw this as a great opportunity to do programming outside of DC in Asheville, and they wanted to help make it happen for the first 6 months or so. So those two things gave me the opportunity, right? But what did I do with the opportunity? That's the next thing. The first thing that we actually did up in the space upstairs in the early fall was have a meeting of the group. It was the Asheville Art Book Club. And they had been meeting a variety of different people's houses. Don Rowe, who's an artist in Asheville that you may or may not know of. This is right there. There's a few other folks that you may or may not know of in there. They reached out and said, can we meet in your space? We've heard you're trying to create a community space. And I was like, yes, this would be great. The very first people to meet up there were them, and they met in this area was my meeting space, and then behind was my studio space. But, and what's beautiful about this afternoon for me is the very first event that I did in Revolve was a WCU grad show, Here to There, Small Works and Performance, on October 23rd, 2015. It's the very first thing that I did. And how did that happen? That happened because Tom Ashcraft, who was the previous grad director, had just moved down to Asheville, down to Western, to start to work in that program. We knew each other. We knew each other pretty well, but we didn't know each other on a daily basis. We knew each other from the community up in DC. But I had not been in DC for years. But we reconnected once he came down here, and he said, hey, I would like to do some off-site programming with the grads. Could we do something in Revolve? I'm like, yeah, this is like happening right before, I'm not even having to do much, this is coming right to me. But that made me realize that the space was needed. Like, the space was not, there was no space to show things like this in Asheville at the time. So Tom got together his students, put together a show of small works and performance, and literally within a 1-week period, we had 2 events, and they kind of set the template for Revolve moving forward. We had the opening of the Western Carolina show that you see here, but pre that we had a faculty retreat in the space that was right before the opening, so the faculty got together before the semester and like had a little chat about what they talk about. And then we had the opening, which you see here. You can see some of the small works on the wall around. You can see how the space was kind of laid out to this panoramic. I had my little meeting space here, I had my gallery space here, and then I had my little, basically my home away from home here. And these are all, this was the first class of grads that Tom worked with. And then we had a performance outdoors by one of the grads named Vince. And he did this incredible performance. Trains were going by. This was in the back public area. And all of a sudden I was like, I've got this space upstairs that's a studio space and exhibition space, but I just realized I could utilize public spaces around the building as other opportunities to show work that maybe didn't fit in the gallery space. And then all of a sudden the idea of Revolve, or what Revolve could be, and to be very frank about why it's called Revolve, was that it could change, pivot, become different things as it needed to, and I just needed to find the right spaces, right venues, and it didn't have to always fall right within my little studio space. Revolve could happen in other places. The second event that we did that fall, which happened a week later, was the very first draft series. Some idea that I came up with, probably having a bourbon with friends somewhere in Asheville. And that was this idea of having artists come in, because this is kind of why I established it to begin with, have artists come in and present work that was in progress. And then have the community give them feedback about this idea. And then maybe 6 months later, a year later, the artist would show the work in the space, and we'd see kind of how that happened. And this was with William Price, who was a very eccentric, interesting fellow, who said yes when I put out the call for a first draft series. And he proposed to do a talk about the art gods must be crazy. If you are familiar with the movie, The Gods Must Be Crazy, somehow he was able to tie together the themes in in that film with the themes of the Dadists in Paris in the early 20th century. And he made the argument pretty amazingly, convincingly, that the Dadists were pulling a lot of their ideas, especially a lot of their subconscious image making from what the Gods Must Be Crazy film was showing that the Bushmen were doing on a daily basis. You can read a little bit about what was going on here, but this was the first thing, and we showed it. I set it up. This is how our first little area looked in the space. You can still see the Western Carolina student work that's in the space. So you can see that I was already thinking about, okay, it doesn't have to be separate. They can be together. Actually, events get people to look at the artwork. So you have these openings, everyone shows up, but then you sit there and no one shows up. I start thinking, well, I'll do events with the artwork around it, and then I get people during the breaks or before the event looking at the artwork, so therefore lots of things are being served here. These events grew. I started having events where my space we were outgrowing the space almost. And it was very exciting all of a sudden, because I went from not knowing anyone in the community to all of a sudden being welcomed in the community and getting to meet some incredible creative people in the community. All the while trying to have a studio practice at the same time. Here's an example. Not only did we do a group show with the Western Carolina grad students, we did our very first off-site thesis show with the grad students. So Mary Cousins, who was again the first class of grads back in 2015, she's in the middle there. We put a show of her work up in the space. You can see, not remember there, you probably recognize, still there. And as you can see, when the opening wasn't happening, when there wasn't an event, it was my studio. I would just pull up tables and I would create work. But I also created work that was being surrounded by other amazing work. And all of a sudden, and it wasn't my work, which is actually sometimes a good thing. Like, I'm getting all this interesting input from other people's work. And I also started doing, like I said, finding ways to do events in the space, performances in the space, things that I thought, well, this could never happen, but people would approach and say, can we try this? And I'm like, okay, let's try it. And I would set up chairs, and people would come in and do their thing, and I'd be like, this is kind of just happening. I'm not having to do a lot of legwork on this. Things are coming to me, which again reiterated why I was so lucky and fortunate to see that this was a needed thing in Asheville at the time. And we continue to do exhibitions of artists. This is Margaret Curtis's work. Again, part of a first draft situation where they were presenting work that was in progress, new, different ideas that would then be presented to an audience. And as you can see, my work is over there in the corner. It's all kind of together. There was no real separation. I'm still trying to figure that out. But it was working. But then the landlords decided to sell the building. And that was like, oh, wow. Because to be very frank about it, that's the only way. I mean, at that time, in 2017, the difference between 2017 and 2013, the difference between 2015 and 2017 was pretty big in Asheville. Spaces, because there was all this hubbub about the River Arts District, and everyone was moving in artists from all over moving in. And that's great, but all of a sudden spaces were impossible. So once we lost the space at the Cotton Mill building, I was like, I don't know what we're going to do. Well, fortunately, the landlords who owned the Cotton Mill building loved what we did so much that they said, we're not going to let you disappear. Let's go look at spaces together, and we will help you establish your first year in a new space, because they were from New York, and they loved what we were trying to do in Asheville. I was like, well, and keep in mind, during this whole period of time, I wasn't getting paid. This was just what I did, right? I was living off of my studio work. And when I would sell my studio work, not in Asheville, but up in DC, New York, London, places like that's where that money would support Revolve. And it's still, to this day, that's the model that kind of is happening. But sometimes there would be an infusion of a supporter that would allow us to go to the next level. And that's what happened. In 2017, we moved out of the Cotton Mill, and we found a space at the Ramped Buildings, which is down in River Arts District, right where French Hot Chocolate is. And we found a 1,300-foot space that allowed a front space and a back space. At first, I thought the back space would be my studio, the front space would be the exhibition space. And there just so happened to be a mirrored space right next door to it that was the community gallery space that the building had built as part of their tax break. Wow. But it occurred to me that they needed someone to run that space. And I was like, how about if I run that space for free and don't have to pay rent, and I can double my footprint? And that's what I did, because then all of a sudden I had 3 spaces. One had this huge 1,300-foot space that was open for community events, a small little project space that was in the front of my studio for small focused shows and small events, and then my studio would be in the back. And that's how I moved into it. That was the idea. And within 3 months, studio idea fell out the window because we were doing so many events that I had no room for my studio anymore. And it was at that moment I realized, because I had been making work anyway, it was that point where I realized my studio work is now Revolve. My studio work is now facilitating others' creative endeavors. And that was a really hard thing to get my head around at first, because I had been a practicing studio artist since 1987. Had my first solo show in '99. All of a sudden, I wasn't making work, and I didn't have a studio. My studio was a public space that we did live music in. And we did a variety of different events. We did film nights. We collaborated with Asheville FM and did album listening parties. We did, again, in the project, we did performance work, and we did huge exhibitions of design and hand-painted signs by Scott Allred, who was Rushcan, who was the next door neighbor, who never had a show before. He had his huge show in the community space. It was incredible. We were doing a variety of different things. And it occurred to me at that moment, this is actually feeding my creative ideas. This is where I'm getting ideas. I had 0 ideas here anymore. I was kind of in a huge block. I didn't make artwork from 2015 to 2022. 0. And it didn't occur to me till about 2017, 18 that was happening, because I was just so into it. But when it occurred to me, I realized, wait a minute, I've always defined myself as an artist, as a studio artist. This is weird. And then all of a sudden I was like, no, it's not. This is actually really exciting, because not only am I getting involved in the community and the community is getting involved with me, but my ideas, my sense of what might be next in my work is being supported and integrated by all these other incredibly creative folks from a variety of different disciplines. And I'm not having to go anywhere. It's all coming to my studio. It's pretty wonderful. We had live, so all of a sudden when my studio was going to be, which is down here, you can kind of see vestiges of my bookcases and things like that. We had live music in my studio. That's what my studio became, was a place for live music. We hosted, as you'll see at the thing, like hundreds of live shows. Sometimes, this is Jamie Branch, who's from Chicago, who passed 2 years ago. One of the most incredible musicians. It was like a dream to have this person in my humble little space. And that's happened over and over again. Sometimes we would get 50 people. Sometimes we'd get 5 people. But that was okay, because I realized that those 5 people really were happy to be there. And they couldn't go anywhere else to see this or hear it. And these musicians were traveling all over looking for little spaces to do stuff in. And so I was like, okay, it doesn't have to always be big. But things got busier, and things got bigger. And we started happening, this is in 2018, 2019, our first 2 years. We started doing events, the crowds were coming in, we started doing all sorts of things in 3 or 4 different spaces. And at this point, it was me and 2 assistants, both were paid at this point, part-time assistants paid. I wasn't paid until 2019, but at that point we had gotten a grant, and I felt like 4 years of sweat equity was worth me trying to find a little bit of way to make a living, because I was there all the time doing and facilitating. So I was able to have a small salary from it that sustained me at the time. And we did a variety of different things in the spaces. Performances, live music, art, sometimes art and performance at the same time. Sometimes projected. This was by Lehan from UNCA, working with other universities as well and other university faculty. But our main focus was to really focus on artists that didn't have access to space, communities that were marginalized and didn't have access to space, and we worked a lot with a lot of the Southern Campaign for Equality. We worked a lot with people of color in the city who were looking for spaces to do their projects. And to be very frank about it, if you can see the difference here in the age groups, all of a sudden we started connecting with not just the established communities here, but we started connecting with younger folks who were looking for spaces who Asheville had priced them out of any spaces. And this made a huge difference, not only in my way of thinking about the space, but a huge difference in how we move forward as a space. And after our first kind of year in RAMP, we did kind of a big celebration. We kind of showed what we did in that 1 year. We did 16 exhibitions, 17 art talks, 12 performances, 19 sound events, 2 sound workshops, 8 nonprofit education partners, 7 film screenings. We did all of this during that year. And it was, in retrospect, no wonder I didn't make art in the traditional sense. But I didn't, it was my life. But it was vital, and it's kind of how I was able to sustain not only myself, but other things. What became clear after all of what we saw before was that we could actually do Revolve outside of the Revolve space, and we could partner with other community folks to do things in spaces that we couldn't do other things in. So for example, we partnered with a couple who had land out in Marshall, and they allowed us to do a day-long kind of site-specific performance pieces with 12 different artists from all over the Southeast who came up for a 2-day situation, and we did these kind of walk-around performance. You walk and discover performances, not unlike the Rehappening, right, that we do here every year. This was kind of a little bit more, it was different, but very, very similar model, because that was very important. We also did the Rehappening. We did the Rehappening. We were invited in 2018. We did this reading with live music and John Cage-like ways of composing music in the main space there, which was a really beautiful thing. Again, to see Bernard Well, a very instrumental part of why we were established, but also had a vital part in kind of continuing things. And for him, this was like a big moment, because of his generation, being at Black Mountain College campus was foundational and life-changing. And then we did it in 2019 in the John Cage room, which is a little octagon room. And we had this performance piece that happened. So we were expanding not only what we were doing within the space, but we were expanding outside of the space. Let me see what time it is. What we're doing okay. But this led to probably what would be the cumulative moment of Revolve Phase 2. Phase 1 was Cottonmouth. Phase 2 was our move to RAMP in the years between 2017 and, dare I say, COVID and 2020. Was that we were invited by the Asheville Museum, who were just getting ready to open up their new renovation, their new wing, to do an evening of something. And they proposed that we activate the atrium. But I was like, the whole point of this is for the community to see the renovations and get to see how the artwork is now being exhibited. I think, can we use the entire space? Can we program different floors in the museum? Can we program different spaces in the museum to have things going on all at once, not unlike Rehappening, not unlike what we did at Marshall, but we'll do it within an institution and see what happens. And believe it or not, can't believe it. He said, sure, try it. And they gave me a small budget, and I was able to put together with an incredible group of artists an evening that went from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. Of things happening, and people would, you were allowed to walk in. They had over 750 people came through that night. It was the largest amount of people that they had in a one-day event at the museum up to that point. People came in and they could walk around the museum at their own leisure. There was a tour guide that would show you around if you wanted it, and they would come across different things happening in different spaces. And what was wonderful is to see these artists, and I'll let the artists choose the spaces. We worked together and said, where would be a good space for your setup? What would be the right dialogue to have with the current artwork? And we found these great spaces. We've got, actually the one on here is the Mountain Bitters playing in front of one of Tom Ashcraft's pieces that was in the show there. We've got Shane Parrish playing in front of this amazing map that was in the atrium. We've got Dwayne Barton doing a poetry reading and what have in front of his artwork. We've got Richard Brewster setting up his modular synthesizer in front, 21st century modular synthesizer in front of 19th century still life painting. Just really wonderful ways to think about it, and it was so much fun to create dialogue in this space with the community that lived in this city, and that was always kept out of this space in many ways, and we don't need to get into that. This is Anna Hedison doing a performance piece that was pretty controversial at the time, but it was an incredible piece, and I want to keep in mind that the Vance Memorial, which some of you probably don't even know, that was at that point still in Pack Square, this pinnacle memorial to a former slave owner in Asheville. Before it was torn down, Anna wanted to do a performance piece to point to that and talk about its historical relevance. It was an incredible piece, and was talked about for a while. We ended the night by filling the atrium, as we were supposed to do, with a group called the Drone Choir. It was 2 people who would travel around the country, meet with the local community 2 days ahead of time, and work on a vocal piece together, and then perform it 2 days later live in front of an audience. This was Aaron Dyer is the lead of the Drone Choir. I highly recommend you taking a look at what Aaron gets up to. Aaron currently is, I think, a volunteer fire person in Hudson, New York. They do all sorts of crazy community things. But this was a really great moment where the communities mixed in a institutional space that was at times not open to them. And the community, or the audience, and the performers were all as one. And you couldn't really tell the difference between them. And there was something really beautiful, and in some ways, it was a cumulative moment for Revolve. It was like all of a sudden, the things that I thought might happen by opening up this little space in my studio in 2015 culminated in this incredible space with the audience and the artists coming together to make a piece that couldn't be any other place any other time. And I was so grateful, and the artists were absolutely stunning, and it made for an evening that was incredible. And this was December, it was 12/12, 2020. And then during that period of time while we were doing in the fall of 2020, when we started the first draft residency. You may remember the term first draft from the first event that we did. We did an opportunity where we took part of the space at Ramp, of the Revolve space, and turned it into a space where artists could spend a month creating their work in the space, and then present in a public way what would be happening. So each month, we worked with Jen Gordon, which was very powerful, still is. We worked with artists that never got opportunities in commercial gallery spaces in Asheville. We worked with a variety of different types of people up until December. And then we culminated with Revolve Now, which is what the piece was at the museum. And before we knew it, the pandemic hit, and we were shut down. You know, it happened in March of 2021. All public spaces, for the most part, and artist spaces especially, because they were usually communal, were not accessible, at least for 6 months to 8 months, if people remember that. I'm sure we all do. So all of a sudden, we had this space that we couldn't use, but we built a community that we wanted to connect. And Bernard and I came up with this idea called Homeschool, where we basically did a series of events online to try to connect our community. And we did something called Homeschool, and we did over 22 events over the next 6 months to connect people not only in our community, but from all over. And we have a little library with archived recordings of each of the programs, where you can take a look at, if you wanted to check our website out, and you can kind of see what we get up to. But we did a variety of different topics. Some were local. We did actually, Tracy Morton Gallery was open, showing work, but she couldn't have people there for the artist talk. So we did a Zoom with the artist in the space to the artist talk virtually to people all over. We all know this. We all did this. But this is the way we pivoted, the way we try to figure out a way to still keep our community together. And it actually was really exciting in its weird way, because we got people from all over the world on the Zoom, people from different time zones, who would have never been able to be a part of the community at Revolve otherwise. All sorts of crazy things we did. I think we ended with, we ended with Question Everything, the Women of Black Mountain College lecture. That kind of was like a nice circle back to kind of some of the kind of conceptual and ethos of why we started Revolve here in Asheville. Was partly because of the kind of history of the Black Mountain College. Can't go without. So again, it was a really nice way to connect. And as I said, we also realized we had this space that people didn't have access to as a community. So we decided to turn the space into 1 month single artist residencies, where artists could come for a month, work alone, be safe, and then at the end of the month, come up with some interesting idea for the public to interact with what they did, whether it was virtually or, as what most people did, was have a sign-up sheet where people 2 at a time could go in and see what they're up to. Again, all of this was, I wasn't making artwork at any of this time. This was my creative life, and I was just fascinated by how people solve problems, how the community would find ways to continue to work. And I think if we go to this, which we're starting to wind up now, you can see that by the end of 2022, we have Moses Selmy, incredible, lots of different people from all over. But our very first person, actually I think it was our very first. You see names that you're familiar with, maybe names that you're not. I believe it was the very first person. There's Williams, amazing. All these people. Lex, which we'll get to in a second. Or Brad. Tom was the very first person to be the artist, because he had a project that he was working on in Africa that he needed a space to work in and he couldn't do it. And I was like, this is perfect. You'll be the perfect first artist resident, because you can do this nasty, dirty work in the space by yourself. You're not going to hurt anyone else. And then afterwards, we'll do a public showing of kind of what you got up to. But again, I want to come back to, as I'm winding up here, Western Carolina University has been present in Revolve's life from the very beginning in a variety of different ways. And this residency this year has been a way for me to kind of meditate on that, think about that, and realize how integral Western Carolina, its students, its faculty have been in creating the kind of community life that we'd hoped would happen at Revolve. And also helping me to reconnect with the reasons I love teaching so much, which was creating dialogue and sharing ideas amongst a group of people. So to wind up, because I know it's time, after the pandemic, it was an interesting time. As we know, lots of things happened over the pandemic, and I won't get into all that. But I think what's important to realize is after the pandemic, I'll be honest with you, I have been running Revolve since 2015, so we're talking 2022, so 7 years. It was 5 years of intense programming, even through the pandemic. I decided I might need a break. And also, to be very frank about it, it was very clear that there was a new group of community folks who were really interested and invested in what Revolve was up to, who were younger, had connections that someone like myself, just to be frank about it, a white dude, didn't necessarily make a welcome space for everyone. And it was time for me to quit being the face of Revolve primarily, just to be very frank about it. So this was really hard. I had to say, I need to take a step back. I need to kind of be in the background. Maybe what I can do is then rethink my studio space, because I started having some ideas all of a sudden. Maybe I can recommit myself to the studio space, turn it back into my studio space, and turn over the project space and the community space to this group of folks, this young group of folks. Well, that person that led that young group of folks was Lex Turnbull. Again, a Western Carolina University grad student who had decided to stay in the area and had decided they would like to run Revolve as a co-op. This was all really kind of hard for me at first. I'm being very frank with you. But all of a sudden I was like, wait a minute, this is great. I mean, this is how it happens. You know, there's a point where people are tired of my voice. People are tired of seeing me always introduce things and talk about things. And all of a sudden, there was someone who wanted, with new energy, new communities, to reinvest in what was going on in Revolve. And that's what happened from 2022 to 2024. Lots of different types of programming. Lots of different things happened. It was pretty exciting. And then, as young people do, it was time to move on. And Lex was like, I've got other opportunities, as they should, in different cities. They moved to Atlanta, and all of a sudden, Revolve was in this in-between space, and then at this point, I was ready to jump back in. I was ready to be like, you know, I think there could be a new way forward. Phase 5 of Revolve at this point, where we partner with communities more directly in the community space, and it kind of runs itself. I can run the project space, and I get to run my studio space in the back, and the way that it will be supported is through my studio space and through the community. And that's the model that we're in today. And that's where we are today. And currently in the community space, we have Kristen Morgan Gallery is there for a 6-month residency till the end of the year. She lost her space on London Road. It made perfect sense all of a sudden for me to be like, hey, why don't you take over the community space programming? You'll bring in a new community. It'll take that off my plate so I can focus a little bit on what I'm doing. And it's a new way of thinking, a new way of working. And so far, after the first month, it's been great because there's different types of work going in the space, different communities coming through. In the project space, I'm working with the AV Tech Community College program. Excuse me, we currently have their student show up. Had time to develop another relationship with another institution that didn't have a voice in the larger community in Asheville. It's been really, really rewarding in that way. And lastly, to wind up, last night we had an amazing event that kind of pulled everything together all at once. We had a panel with Western Carolina University graduate student, graduate alumni. We had Jennifer, the new grad director. We had